The entire point of these Project Empower sessions is to help people that are either just listening and learning, or people that are building, or people that are implementing a comprehensive integrated three-tiered model of prevention. And fortunately, in the last 20 years, we've seen a huge shift towards integrated tiered systems. So a lot of what we're talking about tonight will apply to the tiered system that you're working with, but ours is focused on taking three big domains: academic, behavior, and specifically it's positive behavior intervention and support. It is the normal pbis.org. When you go to that site, looking at the work of the National Center, that is the cruxus of the work that Wendy and I have been doing since the beginning of time. And in Ci3T, there's also an additional component on social and emotional well-being. So back in the day, there used to be these separate teams in schools, like one team that looked at reading data, another one that looked at office discipline referral data, and another team that had the best of intentions about supporting kids' well-being, but there typically were no data to make those data-informed decision makings. And in a Ci3T model, it's one integrated system, and it's a data-informed approach to like using student-level data, specifically screening data, which we'll talk about in our next Empower session. And we use those data to help make decisions instructionally about what to do at the school as a whole, or empowering teachers with different low intensity supports, which we'll do in another night. And then also using those data along with other data collected as part of regular school-wide practices to connect kids to validated tier 2 and tier 3 supports. And this is Ci3T. And one of the things that it's a hallmark characteristic of this is making sure that the adults get the professional learning they need to feel confident in doing this integrated system. So we wanted to create this opportunity. We've done this for years and years, more than a decade. I think probably close to, maybe 20 years we've been running these Project Empower sessions. And it's to bring you the most up-to-date information on what works for whom and under what conditions. So this session is just a standalone. You can think about all these Project Empower series like speed dating for professional learning. There is no long-term commitment, doesn't cost you anything. You show up, you enjoy this 2 hours of time together. Hopefully you'll meet some other professionals that are either at the beginning stages of listening and learning, or building, or implementing. And tonight is the first of 5 sessions. You will also see these blue squares above these sessions. In addition to having these kind of like open topics, many of you are at schools, and some of you are district leaders at those schools, where they have a series of Ci3T leadership teams that help schools to move through implementation. So these blue squares represent the work of teams coming together multiple times a year. And your teams are there to support you with implementation. And tonight, like these Empower sessions are just one of the offerings that's used as part of this whole Ci3T implementation and series delivery. So we're excited for the time together. If you find this enjoyable, we encourage you to continue to sign up for other offerings. And David Royer is also running another session, a parallel set of series on slightly different topics, but all related to Ci3T, and those are in person in Kentucky. So if you happen to be driving through Kentucky and you want to go to some in-person professional learning, this is your lucky day. So same concepts. So tonight, what we're going to do is Rebecca and I are going to start by just giving a quick frame about what we mean about Ci3T. And we're going to talk about what this year looked like. And even if you don't yet have a Ci3T implementation manual to guide all the happenings at tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3, you definitely have been doing things to welcome kids back. And I bet when you look at the content that we're encouraging people to consider, you will be checking off the list in your mind to think, oh, we were doing that piece, or we were done that piece, or this is a piece that we don't yet have. And so we'll talk about sharing some successes, and then we're going to talk pretty intentionally about, do people know what they're supposed to be doing, like roles and responsibilities for academics, for behavior, for social and emotional well-being, and then what does it look like when you launch that? Like, what does teaching look like? What does reinforcing look like? And what do the data look like? So just know we're thrilled that you're here. If you are at a district or a school that has a Ci3T plan, go ahead and open that up. So you might have that open so you can kind of make those connections between things that you're going to see here and things that are in your own plan. So as I mentioned, all the materials are here. If you want this presentation, I would recommend you download it, consider taking some notes. And if not, no problem. And as always, we just want to say, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you for the gift of your time and your talent and your professionalism. I deeply admire People like us that have committed their lives to being in the field of education. I don't think there has probably been a more complicated time in history than in the pandemic era to navigate meeting kids' well-being needs. But I do think a wonderful thing that has happened as an outcome of, as we transition out of the main part of the pandemic, is that the world is on the same page about students' social and emotional well-being. And I think that's great that people are thinking carefully about, like, how do we figure out who's struggling like with anxious feelings, or who is struggling with behavior challenges, and who is behind academically and in the area of reading in particular, and also math and written expression. So the whole world is trying to figure out where our kids are at and then what we can do. And we would add to that as another priority that the plans that we make in schools have to also pay attention to teacher well-being, or where everybody's exhausted. So that work on teacher well-being is a work that Wendy Oakes has been leading for the last 6 years, along with Nelson Brunsting, and that's wonderful. And we can honestly tell you that after 2 years of implementing Ci3T, we have seen pre-pandemic that teachers experience lower burnout rates than the national average, and they have a higher sense of efficacy, not in every domain, but in several. So what you're leaning into is not only good for kids, it's also good for teachers. And when we look at what the world was facing, even before the pandemic, we know that there was a ton of kids in our schools that really struggled with both major disorders of childhood. The kids with externalizing behavior patterns, you've heard me say this a million times. We know who those kids are. Their behavior is so quick to capture our attention. They are never sick. They're there all the time, and they disrupt instruction, which is great in one sense because we know which kids are struggling with that. The kids I worry most about are kids with internalizing issues, shy, anxious, withdrawn, because those kids are not going to do things that impede our instructional experiences. So oftentimes those kids get left unnoticed. And there are some kids that have both of those challenges. So in our work today, I want you to keep in mind that what you're doing is wonderful, because not only is it meeting the academic needs of kids, and not just the general education community, also kids that receive special education services. And this is important because less than 1% of school-age kids will actually go on to receive special education services for their behavior challenges. The vast majority of the 20% of the student body that struggles with mild to severe, internalizing and externalizing issues, they are alive and well, and they are in your general education classrooms. And as somebody that is a former gen ed and special ed teacher, I am confident that not every program has well prepared general education teachers to know what to do with those challenging behaviors. And that is the number one thing that people come to say, is like, I don't know what to do. Like with all these kids that are having challenging behaviors, they didn't feel like they got what they needed in their teacher prep programs. And frankly, they were right. So the good news is the systems level approach that you are leaning into with Ci3T, it was initially started in California. So shout out to the California crew that's here today. And we've been learning from people literally from coast to coast. And as part of our current research partnership, some of which shows on this call, we get to continue to learn. Our current portfolio has several $1 million, multiple IES grants, and it's through the graciousness of the Institute of Education Sciences that we get to continue to learn together. And some of the people that are in this session tonight are actually part of a randomized control trial where half of the participants are receiving this traditional professional learning experience, and others are receiving an enhanced set of professional learning experiences, which will become available to the entire world in 2 years. So hang tight on those. But as we move forward tonight, and I love Stacy's smile because she knows she's been dealing in the weeds on all of this. And I want to give a shout out to Nettie because I know she's running her own professional learning series. So lots of users. And if you're brand new to this stuff, you got a lot of time and expertise with folks in the room tonight. So just to be clear on what we mean by Ci3T, I want to explain what this means. And there's actually sample Ci3T manuals on the COVID tab on our website. So if you want to download an exemplar to see what one looks like for elementary, middle, or high school, feel free to. But in general, it's the same 3 levels you've probably been hearing about. Tier 1 is for every single student, not just kids that are in the general education community, but when kids walk in, they are getting access to a certain experience in terms of high quality academics. They're being taught behavioral expectations. They are being practiced and reinforced. And there's a commitment to actually literally using a validated resource to provide instruction at tier 1, and all that's woven together in integrated lesson plans, which Wendy Oakes and Katie Lane have been leading for some time. And even with all that in place, there is still an expectation that there's going to be some kids that need more than tier 1 has to offer. And so tier 2 is not like it's not the pre-refer intervention process. So it's not your GEI process. It's just, there are going to be some kids that need more than tier 1 has to offer. It's not a tragedy. It's an expectation. Doesn't mean it's a bad teacher. Doesn't mean it's a bad kid. What this is, these are targeted interventions, some of which can just be embedded in daily instruction. And we'll talk more about that tonight and later in this series. And some are going to be for kids that no amount of M&Ms is going to make it happen. They're acquisition deficits. They haven't learned how to do something. So we're going to teach them. And other kids, it is an issue of motivation. So we want to acknowledge and reinforce them. And tier 3 is not special education. It's actually the most intensive level of support, and it's reserved for kids that have multiple needs. So I might do something like a functional assessment-based intervention, and Eric Common led a randomized control trial of the process that we have available on our website, and that worked very well. You also have tier 3 interventions for kids that have literacy needs. I know Elise is beginning to explore some work in her initial work as a doc student about like what reading interventions might look like for middle and high school students as they have needs beyond tier 1. But there are 3 levels: tier 1 for all, tier 2 for some, tier 3 for very few. And then there's that same 3 features we've been talking about: academics, behavior, and social and emotional well-being. And they are not siloed. So there's not like a separate list for what to do with academics and behavior and social and emotional learning. It's all focused on meeting kids' needs in an integrated way. So when you look in your plan at tier 1, or even if your plan's not yet organized, think about the happenings at your school. What are you wanting to happen in terms of academics? Is it like at the elementary level? Is it 90 minutes of English and language arts? Is it, what are you doing to teach writing? What are you doing to address district and state standards? For the behavioral component, this is positive behavior intervention and support. And in this, we have a plan for being proactive, and we have a plan for responding to challenging behaviors. And I want you to really underline that and put an exclamation mark, because sometimes people think that there's no plan for responding when kids have challenges in a Ci3T model, and that's not true. In this PBIS element of this, you're going to actually use a data-informed approach to building your expectation matrices. So in the schools that Stacy trained, a survey went out to all the faculty and staff in those buildings, the school-wide expectation survey for specific settings. Every adult, cafeteria workers, social workers, school psychologists, classroom teachers all filled it out so that they could give input on what they thought every single kid needed to know to be successful at tier 1. And that became the content and the expectation matrices that are posted as far as like how to be respectful, responsible, give best effort in like classrooms and hallways. In your buildings right now where you're working, either in your school or in your district, do you have an expectation matrix that's like signage to say, here's what's expected? And so we're seeing that in general, the schools either have them or some people have them in the district, and that's great. Now, here comes the game changer. In addition, in a Ci3T model, during the building year, the teams walks through this process about adopting a validated resource, and it literally gets taught as part of tier 1 instruction by a general education teacher. So it's not like the gen ed teacher leaving, school psychologist coming in. Teachers teach these lessons. So in some districts, it's second step to success, which Katie Austin and Paloma Perez Clark have been doing a series of systematic reviews on those. It could be positive action. And there's a number that you could choose, and there's validated ones like at the secondary level as well. And the idea is that you explicitly teach those skills to teach kids how to set goals, to be self-aware, to be able to, self-regulate when things are frustrating, and how to advocate for their own needs, etc. And so in the pages of your implementation manual, it all comes to life by organizing the happenings. And if you don't have this yet, you could download a series of blueprints that are empty, and everybody starts with this and they begin to pull things in. And it's not just about filling out forms. It's about having these conversations to say, here's what we're doing, here's what we'd like to be doing, or we might be doing something that doesn't have enough evidence behind it. So in the pages of a Ci3T plan, what I'm going to show you and what we're going to talk about today is like how this year launched and what happened at tier 1. So for example, in your buildings, our teachers starting to use things like these low intensity supports to increase engagement and limit disruption. So are we seeing things like active supervision and pre-correction? Is there a respectful way for responding to challenging behavior? So when a kid messes up, instead of yelling at the kid, we want to show empathy, keep instruction moving forward, not allow that behavior to shut down instruction. Instead, acknowledge other kids who are meeting expectations, redirect the child who's off task, reteach it if you need to, and then reinforce them with your universal reinforcer ticket as soon as possible, and have a clear plan for how you're going to teach social and emotional well-being at tier 1. In a Ci3T model, this is what's happening in a preschool, in an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. So this just simply is the experience that kids get when they walk in. And we create this experience for students by first teaching all the adults in the building to say, do these things with your kids. And then in addition to teaching these things to the kids, we also want to make sure that we're recognizing the kids for meeting expectations, and also reinforcing the adults for doing these things, because we're asking people to come together and have a uniform set of expectations. And I agree with Wendy that this is the perfect time to be putting in these Ci3T models of prevention, because many kids, as they are recovering from the pandemic and coming back, they need these clarities. In some of your buildings, you have kids that have never had a formal school experience. A middle school was 6th, 7th, and 8th. You've got 8th graders. It's like opening a brand new school. It's all new. And the good news is, in a Ci3T system, you're also going to have data that's going to help drive the decision making. So that idea, like Scott's work, like he's benchmarking 3 times a year in fall, winter, and spring to see how kids are doing academically at those 3 time points, and how they're doing in terms of their internalizing or externalizing behaviors. And it's not to label them and place them and exclude them. It's actually to use that information to shape instruction. So in the pages of your manual, you're going to have these plans for what gets taught, and it's critical that we give the professional educators in your building a voice to give input on how this is going for them. So in fall and in spring, and you guys are going to be starting this if you're already in an implementing school in the next couple of weeks, where you're going to send out surveys in fall and spring to say, how is this going? What do you think about the goals, the procedures that we're asking you to do, the outcomes? Is it working? And that's social validity. And you're going to be asking teachers, like, what are you doing in terms of instruction? Like, what are you teaching? How are you reinforcing? How are you using data? And we're going to use that information to connect kids to supports, as well as refine our tier 1 efforts. And as I mentioned, there's no secret closet for all the tier 2 reading interventions or behavior interventions. It's one integrated list that is in your manual, so that there's already a game plan as to what to do when kids need either a tier 2 or a tier 3 support. So that's the nice part of having this in place. And if you're thinking, oh my gosh, we don't have that, I would say you don't have that yet, and that you've got the possibilities of being able to pull that together over this next academic year. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to turn this over to Rebecca, and she's going to help us to think back on how your rollout went. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Rebecca.
Thanks. Okay, so we are going to take some time to talk about and to think about how your Ci3T rollout went at your school. So you can, perfect. Thanks, Kathleen.
I was in your head. I was reading.
You really are. So when we think about rolling out Ci3T, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the different stakeholder groups that are represented in your Ci3T implementation manual. So you have faculty and staff, you have your students, and then you have your families. And we want to make sure that all of these groups are aware of Ci3T and the different pieces of that implementation manual that pertain to them. And really, this idea of rolling out your plan can be a lot of fun to do and to be a part of. So you can click to the next slide, Kathleen. And you might start that whole process by thinking about your Ci3T implementation manual. So does every staff member in your building have access to it? And it can either be a digital copy or a printed copy. Think for a moment, if you're at a school implementing Ci3T, how is that implementation manual shared with you? And do you have easy access to it? You might also think about the signs around your school. Did you get signs hung up in your classroom with your school-wide expectations? Do you know where those are hanging around your building? And are they in places where they can be referred to easily when you're interacting with students? What reinforcement system are you using? You can think about things like, do you have your Cougar Cash or your Best Bucks with you so that you're ready to reinforce students? Next slide, Kathleen. Thank you. In that implementation manual, as a faculty and staff member, you'll find a section that outlines what your roles and responsibilities are for each of those domains. And Kathleen was talking about those earlier. So under the academic responsibilities, you might look in your manual to find something about using low intensity strategies in the classroom to help support student engagement. Things like active supervision, pre-correction, instructional choice. In the behavior responsibilities section, you might find something about following your school's reactive plan and leading with an initial response that's positive. We want to praise students who are meeting expectations, redirect students who are struggling, and reteach expectations as needed. And then we have that social skills responsibility section. So you might think about what social skills curriculum is being taught school-wide where you're working right now. How often are you supposed to be teaching it? Things like that are all detailed in that section. And all of those pieces should be outlined in your implementation manual. And Kathleen's going to go over each of those domains in a little bit of greater detail. But here we just want to be thinking about how your faculty and staff, or how you can find that information in your implementation manual as you move through the year. And then again, we want to think about things like signage. Do you have an expectation matrix up in your classroom? One that lists all of the settings in your school, and one that might be specific to a setting like the classroom when you're in it, or are there hallway expectation posters up in the hallway? Do you know what expectations as a faculty and staff member that you want to be actively teaching to students? And you can also think about where these show up in your school, and if and when and how you'll be using them as a teaching tool to remind students of the expectations, to provide them with behavior specific praise when they're meeting those expectations. We can't just assume that students know what to do. We want to make sure that we teach them what to do. And the beginning of the year, when you're rolling all of this out, is the perfect time to get started with that. And for students specifically, something that schools will do sometimes is have these like big kickoff events or assemblies where they roll out and they introduce all of the new expectations to students. Sometimes mascots are involved with skits, with examples and non-examples of those school-wide expectations. And these can all be opportunities to teach or to remind students of the expectations, and to do the same thing with the reinforcement system that's in place at your school. And then we can think about the last stakeholder group, our parents or families. Thanks, Kathleen. How are you getting information about Ci3T, or how did you get information when you rolled your plan out to families? Did you send, or can you send, a letter or a brochure with some information explaining Ci3T and what they can and can't expect throughout the school year? You'll notice that this letter on the screen says sample, and the reason we don't provide a template for this is because we really want to make sure that the language about what is happening in your school with Ci3T comes from you guys. But if you click to the next slide, Kathleen, you can see and think about the things that you might already have in place that are going out to parents. Like, do you have a family newsletter that goes out, or a brochure already that you can just add additional information to? And on our website, we have some awesome resources for families that are available in English and Spanish about using those low intensity strategies at home. Okay, so now we're going to pause for a moment and think about the rollout that happened at your school. You can think about your stakeholder group as faculty and staff members. What went well when you were learning about Ci3T and your implementation manual? And then you can think about students and families. But we're going to just take a second to kind of think about the rollout across those three stakeholder groups, and then reflect on the three questions on the screen. So, do you know where your implementation manual is located? What have you seen done well in your building? And what are you looking forward to in the coming year? And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen, who's going to walk us through some implementation at Tier 1.
Great. And thank you so much, Rebecca. That was awesome. And I love the ideas that you guys just posted. And as you're thinking about these things that you've seen well, or that you've done, and the location of your manual, as we go through these next slides, I encourage you to celebrate the successes, the things that have gone really well, and to think about what other people are accomplishing around you. And I think it's just such a wonderful thing to get the chance to interact with people that are doing this in real time. I remember one of the principals that I first worked with at one of the districts that's represented here today. She was somebody that reached out and said, I just got hired in this district and I don't know what Ci3T is, but they told me to reach out to you. I remember meeting her at a coffee shop, and we helped her locate her Ci3T implementation manual. And this was like 2 weeks before the school year started. And I wanted to see how her rollout went. So I had the opportunity to go watch her the first 2 days before the kids got there. And I want you to know what it looked like. When I walked in, it was a very large elementary school. I walked into what was a gym, and she had these little tables and chairs arranged. So there was 4 adults at every little set. So it was like a giant thing of cooperative learning. And everybody was there: cafeteria workers, paraprofessionals, front office staff, teachers, everybody. And on the screen, she had located the PowerPoint slide that her previous principal had built as part of their planning process during the implementation or the building year. And she had every single table, each person had a physical hard copy at that time of their Ci3T implementation manual. And on the slide, she was revisiting the sections, explaining a little bit about it, giving people time to process and discuss it and write their own action plans. And I thought that was so genius. And I admired her a great deal, because can you imagine what that's like, walking into a system where it's system wide and it's brand new? And she's just one of the many talented people that we've had a chance to learn from through the years. But when I get to put this presentation together every single year, what I get the chance to do is reflect on these great things that you're telling us right now. So I encourage you to, when we get into our breakouts, which are going to happen in just a few minutes, think about what you did well, share it with other people, these things, other things, and then be a craver of information. One of the things that I'd love to do right now, and Wendy and I've done this for years, is just take a step back. The kids are in, you're in, everybody's there. We've got our pandemic pants on. We love the stretchy waistbands. We're enjoying school. And now what we want to think about is just, we want to look back so that we can move forward. And in this, what I really want to ask myself as an implementer is, do people know where to find this? And what has happened in terms of explaining to the adult, like what they need to know in terms of their roles and responsibilities. So if you look at a small piece of what's in your plan, it might have some connections to your core curriculum. And many of your manuals actually say, this is what we expect you to teach. This is such a gift. And at a time when teacher turnover is at a premium, this is wonderful, because this is literally detailing what people need to know to do to teach academically. And there are tons of questions out there about, oh my gosh, I feel like sometimes these kids are, they don't have a lot of formal experience with school right now. So there's a lot of things that you're probably teaching that you didn't have to teach previously at those grade levels, because it's now, again, so unfamiliar. So when you think about things like those low intensity strategies that what Rebecca was mentioning, these are times where this could be a great tool to put in a brand new teacher's toolkit, or a reminder for a more seasoned teacher. So when we have those low intensity supports on that same webpage where you located the materials for today, you're going to see another set of navy blue accordions, the same color blue. You can actually download and use, like I know that people on this call have used these in professional learnings for their district-wide PD days. They've used them in faculty and staff meetings. Some people have done hour-long sessions. Some people have done 10-minute tips for success on how to use these. Some people have done a book study. And you can take this slow. You might do one a month, you might do one a semester, but the idea is give the adults the tools that they need to be positive and productive while also being rigorous. Another thing that you're going to see in your academic plan is that there's a lot of information there. This is the one piece of your plan that every time you give them a tip for success, like if you're starting a faculty meeting or a professional learning community, I would say, please open your manual, scroll down to this section, take a look at this. This is what we're talking about today. So that like you can make that very explicit connection. So like as Scott's getting started rolling out in his school, he might say, we're going to start the year with making sure we all know how to do behavior specific praise. And in tonight's session, we're going to give you some of those details on how to do it. So some of the things that he might take back as questions is like, how is it going? Is anybody using these low intensity supports? Which ones do we want to start with, and make a plan for how you're going to drip out that information. Then I'm going to encourage you to think about, go to the center stone, look at your positive behavior intervention and support framework. That signage piece that Rebecca mentioned is very important, because it's not just a cute poster. That's an instructional tool. That's your reminder for every adult, and it's the kids' reminder for every student that it's their guide about how to be successful in every single setting. And so we're going to show you tonight some lesson plans that are available that you might even just craft and send out to people. Like, here's a quick little thing about tell, show, do, because some people are like, how am I supposed to teach expected behavior in the cafeteria or hallways? You're going to teach it just like we do academics. So that content, this is your instructional tool. This is going to be, again, customized based on the value and the culture and the priorities of the adults in your building. And the science behind this, it's all grounded in applied behavior analysis, is that you are teaching kids the behaviors that are prioritized by adults. And so when kids demonstrate these, then every adult, not just the classroom teacher, every adult has the opportunity to give feedback to a child, to acknowledge them for meeting those expectations, not exceeding, but meeting. And when we look in our blueprint, there's also a plan on how to respond when challenging behaviors come up. They're going to come up. I'm 100% sure. Even if you are the best teacher, we've all been there. Like, even if you're the best teacher in the world, there is 100% going to be someday when somebody's having a meltdown because something went wrong. It's okay. But we want to make sure that that 6-step approach about, again, showing empathy, maintaining instructions, we want to make sure that that's fluent in a teacher's repertoire so they know what to do. And we also want everybody to know what's managed in the classroom and what's going to get managed in the office. And we need to make sure that people are clear that when a kid goes to the office, they ideally aren't coming back crying or bleeding, but something has happened in there. They're going to get some input to help redirect on how they're doing. And so when you look at that whole scope, I try to think about this as there's a part for teaching, practicing, and receiving reinforcement, and a plan for responding. So it's both pieces that they need to know how to do. And so we want to check in with that. And I would encourage you to first start with the instructional piece. Like, do people have the signage up? Do they know how to teach it? But we do need to teach the expectations, and we want to launch them at the beginning of the year, and we want to revisit them. And work from the National Center on Positive Behavior Intervention Support has taught us that we know challenging behaviors spike in December and in March. So we want to teach, especially in front of those months. So we wanted you to see how that's going. And lastly, when we look at that third domain, what your validated resources that you chose, teachers need it in their hands. And if it's something that is reproducible, we need to make sure they have what they need to be able to teach it. And I encourage you to also, in your plan, hopefully there's like an appendix in there that has like an instructional schedule for like the plan as to when those things are going to get taught. And if not, then that would be some refinement that we might want to talk about, because it's not enough just to get this great resource. We have to have an actionable item on how to use it. So it's just like a gym membership or a new fitness plan. We want to make sure that we have calendared out when it's going to happen, because if it's just on a wish list, on a Post-it note, if we don't build it into the instructional day, it is likely not going to happen. And I love the fact that some people, when the pandemic happened, some of our district leadership team said that there was at a moment of relief for them, because there was like this flood of these well-intended people reaching out to say, I've got this curriculum, you could use this. And these schools already had it. All they had to do was use it and dig deeper and teach more additional lessons. Some people, were making plans to share it out with families. So those plans for addressing social and emotional well-being, part of it is making sure that the adults in the building are feeling confident and comfortable knowing what it is they're supposed to teach and when they're supposed to teach it. And some of the high schools did these amazing things where they'd have counselors on standby, so that when the teachers were teaching lessons, like if a conversation shifted in a direction that the teacher didn't like, they felt like they needed some more support, they could literally just call down to the office and say, hey, I'd love a co-teacher to come up. And so that was like an opportunity to build in expertise from both. And then there's this idea about like, how do you weave it into daily instruction? So in teachers' integrated lesson plans that they're going to put together, ideally when we're teaching anything academically, like it might be I'm getting ready to go into a small group and I might be doing like a physics lesson where I'm going to teach kids how to build the tallest tower. And I might have it priced out where, they have uncooked spaghetti strands and they have marshmallows and they have like a ping pong ball and some masking tape. and they have to buy each of those products, and they have to build the strongest, cheapest tower that balances the ping pong ball. And there would be other instructions. But if that was the assignment in this small group, if I was teaching that lesson, I would start by doing some pre-correction to remind people about how to use those materials. We're not going to eat them. We're not going to throw them. We're going to use them, and we're going to need to keep a budget. So make sure that you have somebody that's going to be the accountant in your group, and you're going to have somebody that's going to be the store manager. And then I would say, today is going to be an opportunity really to have some really good listening skills, like when the ideas may be different than your own, because you all might have a different idea on how you want to build this tower. So this is going to be a chance for us to practice that lesson that we talked about in our social skills at tier 1. And I wouldn't say tier 1 to the kids, but you're going to show them how those lessons that you're teaching at tier 1, the idea of actively listening and resolving conflict, if you don't exactly have the same plan on how it's going to be built, that you're going to come to consensus. But I would tell all that to the kids before I launch that lesson. So as we start thinking about the work that you're doing with those integration of this at tier 1, we made this integrated lesson plan to make this a little bit more concrete. You've got what we just talked through, like an academic objective for what they're supposed to accomplish. We're going to remind them of the skills that they could use when interacting with others during that time. And we're going to pre-correct on those expectations in our matrices. And all those low intensity supports, we're going to thread through that instruction to help kids stay engaged. So it might have like a journal prompt at the beginning, and I might have 2 questions and say, you pick one to answer. Or I might say, when it's time for independent work, you can, if you want to, you can slip your shoes off or keep your feet on, or you could do this with a partner, or you could do it independently. I can weave in choice. Or I might do things like, doing some higher rates of behavior specific praise when I know kids are getting to the most complicated parts of the assignments. But the point being, we want to have a way to thread this all together. We are about to open up the breakout rooms, and by we mean Stacy. Don't feel like you have to answer every question, but these are some of the questions that you might want to start with now. Like, do people know their roles and responsibilities for each of those 3 domains? How is it going in terms of those low intensity supports? How is reinforcement looking? So go ahead and enjoy this next 10-minute time together to share your success and listen for great ideas from other people to help refinements for yourself. So we'll catch you back here in 10 minutes. We're going to take a deeper dive now into some procedures for teaching. So we're going to show you some things, and some of these you might think, oh, I'm already doing that. And some of you might think, oh, I'm not doing that yet, or I might want to put this in my queue. In your plan, if you have your plan open, if you keep scrolling down under that part for, you see academic, behavior, and social, you'll see students, faculty and staff, families, and then you see administrators. And I love that one of the administrators was saying, I like that that piece is in there because it's keeping me accountable as well. Right under that, you're going to find this section. And if you are having any challenges finding it, we can help you find it when we go to our next talk time. But basically, to that point that Rebecca was making, everybody's a learner in this system. So we have plans for how we're going to teach faculty and staff, and then students, and then the families. And the reason we put the students first in the plan, but second here, is that we're going to create the experience for students by first changing the experience for the adults in the building. And when we say teaching the faculty and staff, it's not just teachers. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Everybody who's employed, who's a part of your school community, and I would say substitute teachers and volunteers are included in that as well, because we want, and I'm watching Tammy nod. So if Tammy says yes, I know it's true. So we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because that's how we're going to communicate with kids. So when you think about this part of your plan, if it were empty, this is what it would look like. And as you go to start looking at some of those pieces, this is going to be a time to think about, what did we plan to do as we initially launched this year and as we move forward? Like, is the signage up? Am I referring to that? Like before I head out to recess, or if it's at a high school, like before I had, dismiss kids to go to the cafeteria, or at the end of the day, before I dismiss them to go to a pep rally or something, I'm going to use that signage by saying, hey guys, who's going to show me one way we're going to show some respect when we head out to the game tonight? And then, or who's going to show me one way we're going to be respectful when we head into the cafeteria? And it doesn't, and it takes practice for it to feel comfortable coming out of your mouth, but it's just part of the expectations that we teach, just like we teach expectations for, okay, when you fill out this paper, your name's going to go in the upper right-hand corner, or just a reminder, I'm going to need your phones put away during this part. It's just all the teaching of expectations. And as people were sharing, some people really liked the brochures that Rebecca showed you at the beginning. And so if you like that, there's templates for those on the Building Your Ci3T model tab. You might choose to do that. You might also build a ticket tip sheet for people when it comes time to like teaching expectations and then later reinforcing them. You might also think like in your own professional learning map for this year, like in your implementation calendar, what's on deck? Have you put these empower sessions in? Some like Tammy used to do this thing where she allowed people to sign up and she would send 2 people from her building to come to these sessions with the expectation that they then would come back and present to their faculty and staff. And I remember getting snapshots of pictures of them presenting up at the whiteboard and projecting the presentations. And I love that because I just think it further builds everybody's capacity in the building. So beyond just that team as well, to know that everybody's the professionals that they are. And when you're thinking about communicating with families, soon you will probably be doing like back to school nights and newsletters and putting a digital footprint on your website. So you might want to think about what you want it to look like. And I love how Wendy often says to people, you know, you don't have to do it all at one time. You're going to have those incremental goals that you're working towards. And so, and I love something that I had never heard before from Howard tonight, which was great. He said that in his back to school night, they had a Ci3T table out in the hallway, and it was just a place that people could pop in and ask questions. And he had it staffed either by himself or like the music teacher, the art teacher, people that didn't necessarily have appointments with kids, but it was like a drop-in place. I have personally watched people bring, you know, families and community members into a gymnasium, and they do an opening night before, like, to welcome kids back. And before they go take the tour of the school, they literally explain what Ci3T is in that context. So whatever it is, we'd like you to think about what is your plan for communicating these expectations to families so that it's intended to prompt a conversation. Some schools will do for reinforcement for kids. They'll send home postcards. And so they have these little trays in the offices. There's like those plastic trays, and there's the top one. You pull out a postcard, and they have kids do like an art competition to see what Ci3T image is going to be on the back side of it. The second tray has mailing labels for every kid in the building, and there's usually 3 of them at the schools that I've seen it done. And then the bottom one is a stamp, old school stamp for postcards, because it's the cheaper postage. Some faculties will actually do this as a starter activity. So when people come into a faculty meeting, they pull out each of those drawers. They get a postcard, they get a label for one of their kids, they get a stamp. And then while they're waiting for people to come in, they fill out right behavior specific praise. They mail it home, but it connects to this. So they will say like, you know, Corinne, it was great to watch you doing such a great job in the playground. I appreciated the way you respected, blah, blah, blah. So they're like something very specific. It names the setting, it names what she did, and it prompts a conversation between that child and their family member when they get home. So it's transparent. It's not some weird letter from somebody at school, and it's a positive, and it connects to this. So you might think about linking those. You also heard Rebecca talk about having this big one that explains all the setting, as well as, you know, larger ones that are setting specific. So in some of the schools, like in Michigan, I remember walking down a hallway one time with Wendy, and we were in this very large school, and it was just, the signage was amazing. So it was like, be respectful, and then all the items, and then like another 2 classrooms down was be responsible, and all the signage, and their building was set up like in pods, and that signage was in every single building, and it was just so clear. And in those classrooms, you also saw these, like in my classroom, here's what's also expected. And I do want to say, if, especially as you're implementing, sometimes this is hard for teachers to give up their own personal list of expectations because it worked for them. And so part of our job is to make sure that they know the why behind this, is that we're not saying they weren't doing a great job. They were doing a great job, but our job is now bigger than our classroom. So it's like when we teach these kids, we want them to make sure that they do not only well in our setting, but when they leave, when they go in the hallways without us into other people's classrooms. So that universal reinforcement, very important, because you're teaching kids, it's the playbook for them so that they know what to do specifically in each setting. And even for the most talented child, it can be really, really confusing when expectations are different in every classroom. It's really tough. I remember one of my favorite nights when I was as a parent was getting to go to my kids' back to school nights. And one year we're in the hallway, and I think it was a middle school. And I just remember like my bangs feeling blown back, but it's like this teacher had 12 expectations. This one had all the don'ts, and everybody had their own reinforcement system. I'm like, I remember thinking, I don't remember if I can chew gum, have my hat on backwards, or what was going on. And it was great. It was wonderful to see because it was just a reminder of the importance of one simple set. Because think about for kids that have intellectual disabilities or have trouble remembering the rules. So when you think about that, one of the other things you're going to find on our website, and if you're one of our district partner people, we can also help you craft these, but you'll see these very simple lesson plans that are customizable for you to use for your expectations. So it's just tell, show, do, and then programming for generalization to make sure that they can do these things in other areas. It's a practice and follow through piece. So in these lessons, you basically just take your expectations for your setting, and the lesson plans like take one setting and they're telling the kids like what those behaviors are. They're having a conversation about it. And then there's the show part. So oftentimes kids will get pulled up to model it, to demonstrate it. And this is a great opportunity if you have kids that are looking like they're just at the cusp of needing like tier 2 support, pull those kids up and let those kids come demonstrate the examples, not the non-examples, because they already know how to do those. So you have them come up and be part of the peer models, and then they have the opportunity to practice, like restate it, explain why it works, and they have an opportunity to use those in other areas. And so oftentimes when we do this, we will say when people come back like from like lunch or from being another period, you can even do as a starter activity. Who can tell me one way they showed some respect when they were, in the art teacher's classroom? Tell me how that went. So you're letting them have this opportunity to, again, talk through what went well. In addition to these like old school lesson plans, there's also these PowerPoint templates that parallel these. And so you would use your own logo on these. You can just like, this is a lion one from our sample school, Lincoln Lion. Some schools do videos or announcements. Some schools do these things called drop, stop, and teach, where literally they come on and say, hey, everybody, no matter where you are, it's time to drop, stop, and teach. And it's as much a reminder for the adults as it is for the kids. And so some schools will do it that, there's a blast out announcement saying this time, this date is when we're doing our lesson. There's a day before reminder. Some schools will actually even email out to all their teachers to say, here's a lesson plan, here's a PowerPoint, use it or not, but we just want to make sure you're teaching on your own style. Some high schools used to do this thing where they had some teachers chose these and some people had these other kind of like cool sets of lesson plans. And I remember some of those were like, it was like playing Jeopardy or the dating game with these types of questions. But what the important point is that whatever the teacher's style is, we want it to be authentic from the teacher and not scripted, but we want to make sure that there's clarity on how to teach those expectations. And some of the tips that are involved in this is making sure that we teach all these expectations so that kids can become fluent in knowing how to do things well in these situations so that we can actually provide engaging instruction. Because when misbehavior happens or things shut down instruction because kids don't know how to ask for help or where to turn things in or how to make their needs known, or that horrible moment as a teacher where you see things falling apart and you're not 100% sure what to do to get it back on track, this becomes challenging for people. So part of these tips for providing engaging instruction is using these low intensity strategies. And I loved in one of the breakout rooms, Rebecca brought up like the integrated lesson plan. And that's just such a good visualization of why we want to teach all these three things at one time. Like we want to teach teachers those strategies. We want to teach kids these social skills. And then it's part of the art and science of teaching is how they get woven into daily instruction. And we want it to be fun and we want it to be entertaining. So as you start to think, I just want to be clear, we're not asking teachers to go fill these in, write these out, although some people might want to do that. And Wendy and others have crafted completed examples if you want to see what they look like. But the idea would be we want to teach with intentionality to make sure that we are showing the kids the connections, that skill I taught you as part of those social skills is important for us and a great opportunity right now to use it. And all those behavioral expectations set the stage for much more comfortable cooperative learning experiences or even greater success in independent work. So we want to think about all those things in teaching each of those pieces, using the integrated lesson plans to pull it together. And then we want to scroll even further down in your manual and think about reinforcement. And I want to emphasize, some schools have this in a way that is, there are tangibles where kids can take their tickets and they can like trade them in. There's like a store. So you might like need 3 tickets to get a pencil, or you might need, 5 tickets to get Tic Tacs. There's also things like non-tangible things. And so like what you're looking at right there, that Ci3T parking space, that's actually in a high school parking lot. And it's not for the teachers, but kids can, with enough tickets, get a Ci3T parking pass. And that spot is closer than the principal's parking spot. And in this parking lot, I think they had 6 slots. And they have a special placard that goes on the thing. They get that practice for a week. There's another picture at the bottom right of the end zone of a football field. And this particular school did this thing where they would draw a certain number of kids. And I think it was a small number, like 3. And so those kids they got a drawing to win a spot in the end zone. And they got to take a friend with them. So that way it's not 3 strangers sitting together in the end zone. Be like going to game with a friend. And then they had pizza that was donated by the community that was delivered at halftime. That was super popular. This is a school in Kansas. Another school in Tennessee did this thing where they had a pleather couch, like fake leather. And so they would bring it out, put it on the 50-yard line. And so kids could win a spot on the couch. So they would have like one person would get drawn and they would bring 2 friends. And I just say these things because you can be really creative. You'll also see that donation coupon. Some communities, those kids have more resources than they could ever need. And so sometimes in those communities, they'll do things where you can trade in your tickets to purchase non-perishable items for families in need. So I just want you to think broadly and creatively. And when we think about procedures for reinforcing, I want to make sure that people are clear that those acknowledgments, like those tickets, are delivered contingently. Like kids don't have to exceed expectations. They're just meeting expectations. And that is important because you don't want to reinforce somebody for being the smartest 5th grade kid you've ever had, because I might be sitting next to that smartest 5th grade kid and it's like, and I got nothing. And we want to make sure that kids know they don't have to be extraordinary to be acknowledged, that your good is good enough. And the other thing that we would emphasize in that is that we want to reinforce effort, not ability. So we want to recognize kids for the things that they can actually control. So when they do a behavior, your consequence, because consequence got a bad rap. Like consequence, people think means something bad. And I did too for years, but I always thought a consequence was something that I was going to get when my dad got home if I messed up that day. A consequence is simply what happens after the behavior occurs. If I smile at you and you smile back at me, that reinforced me. The consequence is how all learning happens. So that you can think about those tickets is not bribery. It's literally used to increase the future probability of that same behavior happening again. So we want to recognize the behaviors we want to see more of. And that's different than a lot of us were taught. Some people were taught that like as soon as a kid shows any kind of sign of AFTA, you over the top them. And if you don't have glasses as a teacher, you need them, because this is what we were all taught to do. You over the top them and then you do one of these. And that's not what we're doing anymore. We want to recognize the good things that we want to see more of, because we are strengthening that behavior and making sure that they see that when you do this, this happens. And eventually that's going to lead to kids receiving naturally occurring reinforcement. It frankly feels awesome when your work's turned in on time and you don't have to have it hanging over your head. It truly feels awesome to get recognition, either public or private, depending on what your jam is, in terms of when you do something well. And it's a wonderful thing, that when you get to access or avoid the things that you either want to get or you don't want to get. So when you think about reinforcement, sometimes reinforcement is introducing something that's positive reinforcement, and sometimes it's taking away something that is unpleasant. And that is not punishment. Punishment is we're going to introduce something and it decreases the future probability of behavior. And the good news is that on those resources on the website, there's tips for success. They're also in some of the ebook that you might have used, or the iBook that you used when you went through the training series. But we want to make sure that the people in your building know the hows and the whys of tickets. We shouldn't be dangling that ticket in front of a kid and saying, if you do this, I'll give you this. This is literally an acknowledgement system designed to give kids feedback on how they're doing. So at the beginning, when you're teaching new expectations, we want to reinforce at a really high rate of behavior. until such time that they've mastered that behavior. Don't be afraid to reinforce at a really high rate until the behavior becomes normative. And then we can take the foot off the reinforcement pedal, so to speak. But you still want to use intermittent reinforcement to keep things in play. So that ticket is just a communication tool to say, you met that expectation. Thanks for being here on time. I appreciate you turning your work in on time. Thanks for bringing your note from home to let me know why you were out. It's just simply an acknowledgement. I noticed that you met this expectation. I'm giving you that feedback, and it's being paired with out loud words. You don't want to be making it rain with the tickets, and you want to use those tickets. And Howard's proud of me right now because I'm filtering that comment that I normally make. But I want to give them some behavior specific praise verbally, and I want to tell them what they did contingently. So after the behavior happens, then I recognize the behavior. So that is going to be the tool. And that's why in your school, this would be a good talking point, is to make sure that everybody in your school is using that same universal system and not having a separate system in their classroom, like drop a toad, dial a frog, because that we want every single kid to know, no matter where they are, from kindergarten to sixth grade or sixth grade to eighth or ninth to 12th, that that is a signal that they're meeting expectations. So it's used to communicate the idea that you've learned this, you're using it, and you're doing well, and I'd like to see more of that. So on the website, you'll find some ticket tips for success, because in the beginning, nobody pops out knowing how to do these behavior specific praise. And that's actually one of the low intensity supports in those navy blue bars. If tonight in your conversation, you were going to focus on one low intensity support, that would be it, in my opinion, just because that is the linchpin for changing all other behavior. And almost every single other strategy involves some use of behavior specific praise with it. So it's just simply a statement where I say, Howard, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for being on time. I'm saying what happened, what I liked, what I want to see more of. And you want to do it as fast as possible in terms of, like, as close as possible in terms of time and proximity. The other thing you're going to find on our website is this reinforcer menu. You might think about making one of these for your school, because this actually gives you a list of things that kids might want to access and things that kids might want to avoid. It's like some kids want to get attention, some kids want to avoid it. So I might get a 5-minute game with a friend. I might get a 5-minute game with my teacher. I might get a shout out in the school newspaper. And those would be all like, I turn my ticket in to get these things, or I might turn in tickets to avoid independent work time so that I could, I can go to independent work time. So I might want to avoid being in a group, or I might turn in some tickets to get 5 minutes of quiet time if I'm not enjoying being in that loud classroom. So this is like the get column, things that I want to get. And this is the avoid column. Over here, I might want to get a class job or go to do a 5-minute dance party or a 2-minute dance party. Or I might want to avoid some of my homework. So you might say, if you want to turn in 5 tickets, you can do evens or odds, you choose. Or I might get a free late pass. And then sensory, like some kids love to listen to music. Like today, in one of our team meetings, Rebecca turned on, I guess, what is today? Earth, Wind, and Fire Day. What is it, Rebecca?
Yeah, September 21st. I won't sing the song for everyone. Like
You could, I really appreciate that. But unprompted, she turns on this song and everybody just started dancing. We had like a 60-second dance party, but it was amazing, like the way it lifted the mood. And Stacy's not, like, we were all, I was in my own element, but it worked. And it was something small, but you could do things like that where some kids are going to want that. And some kids are going to want to escape it. Like they might get noise canceling headphones. Point being, and this is from one of the district partners here today, they just want to have some variety, because one size does not fit all. Even TJ Maxx, years and years ago, they used to have on their sweaters, one size fits all. False, absolutely false. So now it says, their tags say one size fits most. And I want you to keep that in mind, because one reinforcer is not going to work for every single kid. So we want to have some variety. So quite people often say, like, how many exactly do I need to give? There isn't an exact number. It depends. Like some days I might need a higher rate of reinforcement than I did yesterday. So it varies, but in general, way more positive to corrective feedback. So generally the rule of thumb is 4-to-1. So we want to do either behavior specific praise with a ticket or just the behavior specific praise. You don't have to give a ticket every time a kid meets expectation, but we want to build the skills in the beginning, and then we want to thin the reinforcement schedule. And if behavior becomes problematic, we increase it again. So keep in mind that the goal is to eventually fade this out, but there are things like smiles, the good feeling you get, when you don't have work hanging over your head. Those are all things are important. So faded, but not forgotten. So again, just to recap, do not say, if you do this, I will give you this. That actually is dangling a carrot. Instead, you want to wait for them to meet your expectation. So you simply say, all right, guys, before we head into this activity, remember, this is what we're looking for. Then if they engage in it, then you acknowledge it. Similarly, don't say, if you do this, I will give you 5 tickets or 2 tickets. You simply acknowledge what you saw. I love that you jumped into that game. I love that you jumped into that assignment, or I really appreciate you offering that contribution in class. Awesome job. Here you go. So authentic, timely, immediate to the extent. The last piece of the tier 1 puzzle is actually using data to see, is this all happening? What people think about it? And ultimately, how is this working for kids? So in the very bottom part of your plan, if you still have it open, go ahead and scroll down all the way to the bottom. And there's this section on procedures for monitoring. And part of it is like, how are we going to know what's happening for kids academically, behaviorally, and in terms of social and emotional well-being? And when you think about, like, I know some of you on this call are using the SRSS-IE, internalizing and externalizing. And those are both major challenges of childhood, as we said at the very beginning of this. So those are often, when those behaviors creep up, that's an index that there is potentially another area of concern happening. So when we look at those, we want to know that a kid doesn't need to have a perfect score of 0, but if they score in the something more than the moderate or high risk range, we want to know that, but that's not the starting point. We actually want to use those data to look at the overall happenings at the school to see, like, if I have more than 20% of my kids in the building are scoring into tier 2 or tier 3 needs for internalizing issues, that means I have a tier 1 problem. And then also, you'll also see on that program measures, like, you need to give the adults, you just simply need to, a voice so that they have a chance to give input every year, fall and spring, to say, like, here's what I think about what we're trying to accomplish. And we have learned through the years that goal alignment is huge. So Holly Menzies, who's not here tonight, but she's a member of our team, she and Wendy and Mark Buckman have done these studies about, like, teacher efficacy in these experiences. And we've learned that the role of the principal cannot be understated. People look to the principal and the district leaders, and things like being present and fully present, like staying the whole time at trainings. Those are some of the comments that actually came back. So in other words, if the principal believed in the mission and built the time in for professional learning and using data, the faculty and staff also bought into it more so. So they really look to the principal leader. And as part of moving forward, we also want to set really realistic goals. So our first year implementers, our goal is going to be to get to eventually 80%. Your first year target might be 75%. Your second year target might be 80%. But ideally, you're going to get it in place as planned with fidelity. And then we'll start to see shifts for students. So as you're thinking about using data, the second thing that you're going to see in your plan is this 1-page at a glance assessment schedule that says, here's the information we have on every single student in our school. And this is important because we're going to use these data to see what's happening for the school as a whole, specific grade levels, individual classrooms, and ultimately use these data from this part of your plan to build out those tier 2 and tier 3 grids that we're going to actually use to connect kids to those validated supports. So tonight, as we've talked about this whole big idea of saying, like, here's everything that's supposed to be happening at tier 1. Here's everybody's roles and responsibilities for academics, for behavior, for social and emotional well-being. And we said, here's how we're going to teach it, like, in an integrated way. Here's how we're going to reinforce, and we're going to use these data. One of the things we're going to get to do in this series together is talk about how to use these data. And next up, we're going to talk about specifically not just what the adults think, but also what's happening for kids. And I love that districts that are implementing this well, they have been on point. I've never worked with a district that didn't get the data in front of their team members when they needed it. And that's saying a lot. When those windows close, the reports are generated, that people have what they need so they can truly engage in that data-informed decision-making. So you're looking at what adults are saying and what we're getting in terms of teacher-completed independent ratings on those social and emotional well-being. When we come back in subsequent times, we're going to talk about a little bit more about what that looks like. But you'll notice there's not a ton of information collected. You don't need 90 million measures. You need reliable, valid measures so that you know how kids are doing in terms of internalizing and externalizing, how they are doing in terms of their academic performance for reading and for math. And we need to know if this is happening. And if it's not happening, it's not a gotcha for the adults. It's information that we can use to think about, okay, what professional learning might they need to know how to get this piece in place? And I agree with Howard that he just posted in the chat. The work at the district level is so key to success of the site level. 100% agree. So as you're thinking about social validity, we actually have tools on our website. It's on that measures tab, and it's called the primary intervention rating scale. And it's just a way to see what the adults think about what the intended plans are, what they're being asked to do, whether or not they think it's feasible and reasonable. And you're aiming for a score of about 80% or higher. And so every single year, you want to get that information in fall and spring so that you can see, is this still well aligning with the adults' goals in your building? And that's super important. So if you want to see where these are, you are welcome to check these out. They're on our measures tab. And you're going to find everything related to implementation, how to do like that teacher self-report measure that goes out in fall and in spring. And in some of your schools, your districts will be getting ready to do this at the beginning of October. But this is your chance for teachers to have a voice. And we need to know also from the kids' perspective if this is happening. So there's another cool tool that's called the tiered fidelity inventory. And you don't write down the kids' names, but you ask kids 2 questions. One is, can you name the 3 school-wide expectations or 5, whatever they are? And that's important because if the majority of your kids do not know those expectations, they're not yet school-wide for most kids. And it's hilarious to do those because some kids will stand up and say, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And it's like, so good, but that's not this. Like what you're looking for is that be respectful, be responsible, give best effort. And then the second question, ask kids about, during this period of time, have you received like a best buck or a sunflower ticker, whatever it is, because you want to know, is it reaching the majority of your kids? Because sometimes if the reinforcement condition is too lean, like enough tickets aren't going out, you wouldn't expect kids to be engaging in those pages and behaviors. So these tools are going to give you what you need to know. And I love how principals have used this like very specifically to say, we want to move the needle on first increasing our use of behavior specific praise. Howard did a great job of that. I remember his first semester of implementing, he looked at his fall integrity data and he's like, that was the plan he made. So when teachers came back in January, he had a quick plan of how they were going to practice and learn that. So as we wrap up and close out and move forward for tonight, I want to again thank you for the gift of your time and your attention. We will be back together. If you would like to be, you're welcome to join us. We'll be here and we're going to be talking more specifically about systematic screening and actually how to use those data to look at your school as a whole, how to take a peek in teachers' classrooms to see like what you might want to do to support the teacher and how to use the data to connect kids to supports. And it's kind of like an overview of what then the next 3 sessions will be in Empower. It'll be these same times and these will be recorded, and approximately 2 weeks after this session, you'll see a link. And thanks to each of you who gave up these evenings. I hope you found some valuable nugget, and we will hopefully look forward to seeing you next time. For now, have a great night and we'll see you soon.